Beau Brewer, thank you for joining our webinar, Streamlining the Chaos. I have to say, I realized belatedly when I named this Streamlining the Chaos, that really puts a high bar on our webinar. It has to be streamlined, very little chaos, which means that we are going to try to present Colton and I in a streamlined way, which means, unfortunately, that we're not going to allow interruptions through this. Please do ask questions as we go. This is meant to be interactive as much as possible. If you're watching this in recording, sorry about that. If we don't get to your questions live, we will follow up with each and every one of you after the fact. Thanks so much for making the time, and we'll kick it off right now, which the one thing I want to say up the top, I hope you are a retailer who has a problem with content that is coming in from other customers, from your customers, your suppliers. If you are not, this might be interesting, it might be academic, but this is a very specific kind of content supply chain problem. I hope it speaks to your problem, and if not, maybe you'll learn something walking a mile in somebody else's shoes. Thanks for making time. All right, so we're going to walk through a 5-step agenda here. We'll introduce ourselves, introduce Northern, and we'll come right into the problem, the solution, put it in context for you, and then talk a little bit about how to get from A to B. My name is Beau Brewer. I am one of the newer Northerners, just come in through acquisition. I run our content supply chain practice. I've been working with customers in this retail context and other contexts on content supply chain for over a decade. Worked with 3 of the top 10 grocers in the United States, worked with large department stores, large e-tailers. This is a problem I'm really excited to share with you, talk to you about the solution, and I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Colton.
Thanks, Beau. Appreciate everybody making the time here. I'm Colton, our VP of Technology. I do a few different things at Northern, but transparently, this is going to be largely Beau leading this discussion. Hopefully, I'll say 2 or 3 smart things throughout and add some value. But again, you're in great hands with Beau, and excited for the discussion.
I did rope Colton in late. Thanks for making this time. One last slide on who Northern is. That is a work in progress, but we are a digital agency that really focuses on partnership. And that means a lot of different things. What it means is we find the problems that our customers have and work with them step by step across the way, across their process and where their biggest pain points are. Northern started off as commerce, it added digital experience, it added customer engagement, and then recently through acquisition, we've added content supply chain and data analytics. We're going to be focusing just on the left side, that content supply chain. How does the content get into all those different experiences and digital channels, and specifically on this retailer. With that setup, hopefully that's enough context, and we'll get into the actual problem. To do this, I wanted to start with our end state. And I chose a grocer that is not one of our clients. So you're down to 9 if you're playing a guessing game at home for who we've worked with. But I haven't worked with Kroger. It's the largest grocer in the United States. And since webinars are boring, I thought we'd start with a drink. And so if we look at this pretty standard PDP, a lot of e-commerce considerations on pricing and other stuff, that's not what we're looking at. We're looking at this hero image. We're looking at the actual detail images and realizing that Kroger didn't shoot this, that Pabst provided this. And so how did this happen? Well, we don't know for sure. Not my client, didn't help with this process, but I dealt with other customers with a very similar problem, and it probably went something like this. And I'm going to get a little fancy with slideware building, but I wasn't quite fancy enough to build ominous music or drum roll at this point, but you can do it in your head. Pabst probably said, "Oh, I've got a great picture of our product. Here you go." And Kroger probably said, "Well, actually, I'm looking at the 12-pack. Do you have anything, in multiples?" "Oh, yeah, we have multiples." "Well, that's not quite right. Actually, that's a 16-ounce can. I need the 12-ounce. 12 ounce. Sure, got it. No, that's not quite right either. What about our old branding? Nope. Holiday packaging? Nope. This packaging where our crop guy went on vacation? Nope, that's not it either." And I'm being a little tongue-in-cheek, but you can see that Pabst has a lot of content. Kroger has a very specific way that it needs it. And sure, we could work this problem out. It's only a handful of assets. It's one vendor. Grocers that I've worked with have 87,000, and that's an actual number, of suppliers providing them content. Each one of them may have multiple products. The product combinatorially with a number of assets on a PDP gets really big. I would not suggest handling this in email. So hopefully that makes sense. And despite the fact that I promised to stay away from chaos, we're going to get a little bit chaotic by me showing you that this is not a theoretical problem. And Northern is a Canadian company, so I thought it would be great to kind of do some cross-border collaboration. And so I was actually going to choose a Canadian beer. So I don't know if anyone knows the largest Canadian brewer, and it happens to be Moosehead. So here comes the chaos, guys. This is the live PDP from Kroger, largest grocer in the United States, for the largest Canadian brewing company. And the PDP, the actual assets, were so bad that I couldn't even use them in illustrative purposes for what I was trying to show. And I don't know if this really seals the deal, but the bottom of the 12 pack is included. I don't think this helps Moosehead. I don't think it helps Kroger. I don't think either of them is selling as much product as they would like because the content is not coming through cleanly. So this is definitely a real problem. It is a problem that we can see with companies like Kroger and other companies that have product content that is coming to them upstream. So hopefully that makes some sense and resonates a little bit. I will skip just ahead to say, how big is this problem? Your mileage may vary. We've got some polls actually here that ask you to, I'm kind of curious how many people, what is the size and scale of your problem? Sometimes this is a big problem, sometimes it's a little problem, kind of depends on your business. But I'm going to choose some reasonable numbers that I have seen. So it is not unusual to have 50,000 assets per month come in for companies that sell a lot of different companies' products. I think 2 minutes is very reasonable as we get into the solution in the next few slides. Keep me honest, see if this makes sense to you. I'll call out this number a couple of times and say, does this seem like something we save 2 minutes on? I think it's a pretty conservative number. Cost of labor is, of course, going to vary, but if these are round numbers that make some sense to you, they add up to $1 million in bottom line savings per year. That's setting aside top line pull through. So I think there is a problem here. There is a lot of clear costs that we can save. There's definitely some clear revenue we can generate. I think it's a problem worth taking some time with. Colton, have you seen e-commerce companies start to think about this problem strategically, or is it still kind of background noise for them?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think in this kind of current economic climate, everybody across the board, especially like the CFO, but merchandisers, marketing managers, e-com managers, like everybody is very focused on cost sensitivity and like where can they get more for the same team and grow their revenue kind of without scaling up. So obviously this is kind of, to your point in the easy calculation here, I think this is on everybody's mind. But the other thing that kind of you asked around like the top line and the illustration you did with Kroger, I think this is happening more and more. And I think people are like cautious to spend again in this kind of like macroeconomic climate. But I have seen, and I've worked with a couple of brands recently and seeing some pretty incredible results. There's one, I won't name them. They're not here on the webinar today from what I can see on the attendee list, but I'll share some stats. And so April 24, a year ago, April 25, they over 2x their revenue online through their e-com store. And we talked to them because like we don't generally see this. It's incremental revenue lift. You can maybe get like a 10%, 15% bump if you try hard. But when I saw the numbers, I challenged our team. I'm like, we're over reporting or something's wrong. We looked into it and no. And it was very strategic changes to PDP, product listing page, and a lot of it was driven from these assets, right? So these photos, these videos, reorganizing the content to improve their search algorithms on Google and Bing, and getting into some AI-based search. So there's very interesting things that I think can be powered by these solutions, this asset management. And again, I think you teed this up perfectly. There's like very direct cost benefit analysis for, again, your finance department, but the revenue potential, if you do these things right, again, exponentially can grow and improve your stance.
This is why I invite Colton to these webinars. That's great. I appreciate that context.
You're only getting two more things on this webinar. That's my number one of 3.
No, that's great. I appreciate the context, and hopefully this is resonating with our customers because we're going to move on from the problem to the good news. How do we solve this? I'm going to say right up front, this is simplified, but this is a 6 to 7 step problem where we start on the left side for the asset intake process, and we're going to get a deep dive into each one of these things. We move to the middle, which is where the sausage is made internally, and that's going to have a 4-step process that we're going to get into quality control, product association, ordering, and then final production work. And then, of course, we need to distribute this content out to our channels. I will say that this is simplified and it's abstracted and your process may work a little differently, but I do think in almost all cases, customers have to solve at least this set of problems and probably sub-problems in this list. We're going to do a deep dive in each one of these. Hopefully it starts to resonate. Hopefully you start to see some things that you're handling manually or you're handling automated way, and at least validating that you're leading the curve if you have some automation on this. Okay, so the deep dive into vendor asset intake. I grabbed a real world portal. This one is doing a lot of things right. You're gonna have to squint with me a little bit depending on the size of your screen, but on the left side is where you can upload assets. On the right side, you can provide data about those assets. So what I like about this is there are really clear file requirements. It tells you, I will accept a PSD, I will accept a JPEG. I will not accept a WebP. I will not accept a image asset that is too small in the dimensions to use. And actually, if you look at the yellow, it's giving you a little visual indicator that the quality is kind of in between, so I can use it on my PDPs, but I'm not going to use it in my lifestyle or print pieces. And the detail is all provided as well in a very clean user interface for all your vendors. This kind of guidance on the beginning and immediate feedback to customers and your suppliers that are providing this content means that you knock out 80 to 90% of your problem content right away. The other thing is you also want to capture the right content. This is actually lifestyle imagery, so we're asking for campaign names. Many times that's going to be product content, so we want the PDP, which means that we want the product ID. And we're going to get into that a little bit later with product association. Northern contact. This is essentially if Colton was sending me this content, I'd really like to know that Colton was the guy that I was dealing with, because sometimes these assets come across and I really can't find where we agreed that we're going to sell that product. I don't know, it's not we're not finding it in our PIM. That kind of belt and suspenders to know who is the person who knows what these assets are for. If we go off the automation track is a good thing to capture. Of course, the brand name, product live date. These are just a few examples of things. I would say one thing I've seen sometimes is people will capture the licensing rights so that when you upload these assets, you make your legal people happy to say, yes, I'm agreeing that you can use these on your website to sell my product for you. It's a handful of best practices. We covered a few of them, standard intake mechanisms, immediate feedback, capturing the right kind of information up front so that you don't have to go back and ask later and create chaos. The one thing I will say is that thinking about the supplier onboarding process, how do they get access to this portal? Is this part of every supplier that comes in the door gets access to the portal? Is there self-service? You want to make this easy as well, because if getting access to the portal is cumbersome or slow or confusing, your adoption goes down, you get more assets via email, you get fewer through the website and the portal that you've created. So this is, I think, thinking about this from a user experience perspective will pay dividends because you're going to drive more people through this channel. I will say portal is not the only way to throw assets across the gate. We're going to get into a few others as we go forward, but even in those cases where you've got different ways of bringing assets in, you're probably going to have at least some use case where your long tail vendors, 10 to 20% of your vendors are going to fall through to a portal like this. So it's worth the investment.
Yeah, just adding in there, Beau, I think some of the brands that we work with have EDI requirements. Obviously, some of their larger vendors have they're forcing that electronic connection, right? They don't want their humans kind of involved, submitting assets, things like that. So I think just for the audience, I think that's part of the equation too, right? And to your point, Beau, you've got a subset of your vendors that are going to be submitting assets through this process. They're really helpful. We've also supported brands with doing that kind of EDI connection and enforcing that governance through those, again, automated processes, those pre-agreements, right? So different ways of approaching this. And I think it's around standardization and governance in a lot of ways when we're kind of training the internal staff and training some of our vendors.
Absolutely. Yeah, as much as you can automate, the better, although more automation, more problems in some cases, and we'll get into that a little bit later. I think it's interesting that EDI is something that I used a great deal when I was setting up SAP systems 20 years ago. I seem to do it less in digital asset management and content supply chain now, but I think it certainly has a place in this ecosystem if you can get some of your larger suppliers to send you structured data like that.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, of course, automation is going to break down at some point, so we're getting into the sausage making, and the first thing I would ask is quality control by humans, because we can check the resolution, we can check the size, we can check the file type, and you are still going to have exceptions and problems. So the first thing, I actually grabbed these 5 images from production systems from current clients, and these would all potentially pass muster on file size, dimensions, and that sort of automated check. But you can see, starting at the left, this was actually some sort of promotional content where I've got actual text embedded in the image, not something I want on my PDP. I've got a strange skew, not going to be probably caught by users. I've got a top-notch selfie, I think meeting a lot of the selfie best practices, but probably not something I want on my PDP. I've got a great dad joke, which I appreciate, but I'm not sure is going to be appropriate for everyone's standards and brand standards. And then jeans on a rack, which is again, maybe the right size, but not quite right. In fairness to my customers and their customer suppliers, I will say that a lot of these are buyer images. Finding the small percentage of human catch mistakes is pretty time consuming. So buyer images are sent through to part of the merchandising process, not necessarily to be on. I don't think too many people are thinking that that last image is a good one for selling, but you absolutely are going to have assets that are rejected if you take a look at them. Now, maybe we can find a use case where some of the rules are something that we can automate more and more if we have a lot of text on PDPs and we can do some OCR and check for it. But I think there's a point of diminishing returns, and it's so quick for a human to look at these assets and find things that we don't like. Taking a few seconds here, arguing for the more labor high touch probably makes sense in a lot of contexts. So I think we don't need to be rocket scientists to think about reasons that we might not like the content here. And so, just thinking about when does a human put eyes on this before it goes all the way up to the website is the point here. Okay, so then we're coming back out to the product association, or 2B. How do we work through this? And so here I'm going to skip a little bit ahead to the marketing context. We talked about the vendor portal. Product information management is the master data system for our product information. Product brokers, I'm going to leave that until our marketing context, but there's different ways these assets come through. And we are going to have the PIM as our master's data system for product information and the digital asset management for master content across the organization. The key point here is that whether it's through EDI, like Colton mentioned, whether it's from a product broker, whether it's from a vendor portal, you are going to probably not get the ID that you are expecting because your customer calls it something else. So I think the key point here is that one way, shape, form, you should take a vendor product number or VPN and do a lookup, a transform, an automated reference to your internal product ID, whether that's a SKU or something else. That's really the one best practice here, right? And the best practice, there's codicils and different ways that this can flow. And for example, if I do that vendor product lookup and I find 90% of my content, but there's 10% exceptions because the product setup hasn't been done, or maybe we haven't agreed to buy that product. This is where knowing that my contact, hey, I was dealing with Colton, you can go to Colton and say, oh yeah, it hasn't made it into the PIM yet, so we don't know that vendor product number, or I haven't finished setting it up in the merchandising system, so I don't know that vendor product number yet, but we'll fix it. So the next time they send me an update, I've got good data. That's really the best practice here, as trying to catch as much as possible, building air handling in to deal with exceptions. What does that look like from a user perspective? I've grabbed a furniture product shot here. You might have to squint a little bit, but in the lower right, there's a little VPN. So this is and the VPN has already been associated with my product ID, which in this case is a CRC. And I also know, even though this is an assembly shot, as you say in the lingo, that this is related to the dresser. So it's not the bed, it's not the side table, it's not the lamp. It's the dresser here. And so the dresser is the product that I've got in my consideration set. And if I'm doing an email campaign later, I can find it. I can find it by my product ID. I don't need to have the vendor product ID. I know which e-commerce PDP to put this on. That lookup happening in an automated way really creates a lot of labor savings. And so coming back to our 2 minutes, to be able to say, hey, I've got this image, which product am I selling? Where does it go? What PDP does it go on? think about how many minutes that takes manually. Think about how many minutes you can streamline if you're really getting capturing the data on the intake. Okay, moving right along, making good time. Please ask any questions as you go. Hopefully this is making sense, but if anything isn't making sense, don't be shy. Ordering. So taking that same product detail shot that I mentioned and blowing it out, we've got a handful of assets that have come in, different views of this dresser. I've got to figure out which one do I want to put first. This has landed in my system. It's got all the product data I need, but I still need to make a decision which one do I want to feature. Do I put the lifestyle shots first? Do I put the product, the silo first? These are questions that my merchandiser or e-commerce or someone in the system needs to make. Or we let it automate from the customer, my supplier, all the way to my PDP. But in that case, then my PDPs might look a little bit different because the decision is being driven by different vendors. So different companies handle this different ways. Since this is a real system, I know exactly how this customer is handling it. They're transforming it with file name, and their e-commerce system is driven by file name. So again, squinting a little bit, you can see the hero image is actually not the lifestyle image. It's kind of the silo shot with a slight angle. There's the direct look ahead, there's side, and then the lifestyle shots come last. So this is how this merchandiser's made a decision, and it's probably built on brand standards, e-commerce standards that they've probably got a lot of data that this makes a lot of sense for them. But how do I get from A to B? And this is where I think I'm going to make a pitch for enterprise software, because I know how they did it. And what we did is we built them a nice user interface, or actually used a user interface that allowed them to order these assets on the left side. And then we used a custom button and a custom workflow. And this is not rocket science. There is not AI here. It's allowing a human to order the left side and then a computer to rename and reorganize those assets so that there's my first shot, there's my Alt 1, Alt 2, Alt 3, Alt 4, Alt 5, Alt 6. That builds the PDP because the e-commerce system uses that naming convention. Now we can do this with metadata. We can do the ordering all the way downstream in the e-commerce system. You can do the ordering all the way upstream, like I said, from trust that your suppliers know what they're doing and trust their ordering, and just do a check. But however we're going to do this, because it's so particular to customers, because it's so particular to your data, to your decisions, your process, your brand identity, your e-commerce data that you're trying to do, I think this is the situation where we are not going to find off-the-shelf software that solves your particular problem. And so to have enterprise software with the flexibility to build a little custom workflow and a button and maybe a user interface that helps us make these decisions at scale very quickly across thousands of assets coming in every day, this is where the real magic happens. And that could happen on any of the steps along the way, or any of the sub-steps along the way. Thinking about that and thinking, can I find a product that does this off the shelf? No. But can I build a product using bones of a digital asset management system, bones of a PEM that's customizable? Yes, absolutely. And I think that's where you're going to find a lot of efficiencies. Now, one thing I'll say is that this problem is actually the simplest problem, which is taking a handful of images and ordering them. It gets more complicated when we think about modern PDPs where we've got video assets. So figuring out, do I want to put the video product first? What does my PDP look like? What if the customer or the supplier sent me swatches? Do I use their swatches? Do I re-swatch it? What if I've got considered purchase in electronics and there's somebody sending me a spec sheet? That might be something that really drives sales because, you know, electronics geeks can look at that and say, oh, this is exactly the thing I want, and not have any questions. So maybe I want to flow all that kind of content through to my PDP as well, but then I've got a different ordering question. And frankly, still an easy ordering question because I'm getting it all at the same time. Where I think it gets a lot more complex is on updates. So consider the situation where I've got those first 5 assets that are kind of silhouetted assets and standalone white background, and then the lifestyle images come through later. Or maybe I've got a can of Coke and I get a holiday can in November in advance of the holidays, and then in January it goes back to the standard can of Coke. In some cases, that's going to supplement my PDP. In some cases, it's going to replace my PDP. Does that something, you know, is there one size fit all? Do I need a human in the loop? I think this is going to depend a lot on the volume of updates that you do. And so, you know, this particular customer has 3,000 images that come through every day that we're looking at, and only about 100 updates a month, which means that there really wasn't an argument to automate all the updates. They send the updates to somewhere where a human can look at them and decide whether it's a supplement or it's a replacement. It doesn't take a lot of time, and getting it right is important, so they don't really do something strange on their PDPs. In the grocery category, I've often seen a situation where you kind of force the vendors to say, you want to send us some updates? That's great, but you have to send me all the content all the time. As you move into fashion, I think it's very common that you have two different points of creation. You have a studio shot, pretty people in the studio wearing pretty clothes, and then you send them to Tahiti, and that takes a little bit longer, and you got to send a stylist, and you spend a lot more money, but you might want that front and center on your PDP because it's going to create more product sell-through. In that case, as a reseller of that fashion brand's products, do I also want to put my PDP first and have the people on the beach that sell more product? Possibly. What if they're wearing 2 or 3 pieces at once? Top, slacks, handbag, necklace. They sell all 4 of those products. Does that lifestyle product go in 4 different PDPs or just 1? These are probably situations where we have a human in the loop. It's, we'd all like AI to take all our jobs, but so far, some of these human decisions are quite helpful to build technology that helps us do it at scale and supports the decisions and make sure that when I make those decisions, I can quickly act on them. But really, still putting a human in the loop is pretty important on these kind of ordering decisions. Colton, in the e-commerce world, is this all just kind of low stakes problems, or do you see people kind of fighting over ordering decisions, thinking about it? It sounds like you have at least one customer who spent a lot of time and had a good result.
Yeah, again, kind of the interesting thing is not only kind of like set it and forget it, but that one retailer that I was speaking to that had kind of year over year incredible success. They even made some like dynamic recategorization, reordering of products, and they're almost making it part of their strategy to keep the look of the website fresh, right? So even if it's the same assets and those aren't changing on like a daily or monthly basis, they're kind of swapping the order to make it feel like if I didn't purchase on one day, I come in the next, oh, this is actually like a refresh view, or maybe I didn't get to the 6th image. And so it makes kind of the consumer feel like the content is fresh. The other thing that's coming to mind, it's not directly kind of related to ordering, but kind of back to your comment around like PIM and like the various technologies that are interacting here is we've worked with some brands that actually have multiple manufacturers shipping in the same product. So it's actually like your same SKU that's on the website, but you've got 2 different manufacturers, maybe with their own standards that are submitting different assets that then you have to represent on your website or your marketplace or whatever. So it's interesting to look at kind of like the intersection of like, what are your quality standards? What do you as like a retail brand approve or set as a standard for your governance? And like, how do you allow different vendors to submit assets in and get those approved? So I think the approval process and governance is interesting with all this.
It's funny you say that. I'm definitely off script here, but I think it's an interesting anecdote. One of the messiest data problems we ever had was that exact situation where you talked about, where the product ID was actually dependent on the manufacturer, but the manufacturer would occasionally switch. And so the master data system was driven by where we source this product, and then that master data would flow through and I would have the same product, and the e-commerce system wouldn't change because I'm still selling the same product. I just decided to move it from China to India manufacturing or whatever, and then all of a sudden we'd end up with a huge master data problem on the e-commerce and the content supply chain. But this is why it gets fun, and certainly the devil's in the details as you get deeper in this kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
That's probably more than the first hour or 30-minute conversation here. Let's get back into the high level conversation, which is we're almost done with on the solution, and then we'll get into context and distribution. The last step is production. If you're not familiar with the word production in this context, probably on the wrong webinar, no insult intended. But what I mean here is, creative, high concepting. We're going to, ideate and build cool, great marketing content. Then we're going to put it, slice and dice it for particular channels. That's production work, right? So production work in this context is how do we make this content that we've quality controlled and associated with the product and we've ordered, make it ready for the various channels. So this is a place I think you should lean into automation. And I think the technology is getting better and better, whether it's AI, machine learning, what have you. In this case, this is actually a customer, using a vendor that allows us to create a smart cropping point with squares. Even though I came in portrait, it's allowing us to choose the swatch. I think this is a place where the technology is getting better and better, and I would not bet against it. So as much as possible, automating this kind of stuff. And there's a couple of things that are going to happen. Of course, cropping and resizing, removing the backgrounds if that's something that you want to do. I will say that the tech and removing backgrounds, I don't think it's quite there, but I think that I wouldn't bet against it in the medium term. Adding alt text so that if you're not getting it from your vendor, so that you got good SEO, certainly important, and compliance. And then swatches, of course. Sometimes I think the devil is, again, this is a devil in the detail situation. Do I auto swatch? If the vendor sends it to me, do I use it? Do I make a decision? Does a human look at their swatch versus my swatch? And perhaps it's not even just customer specific or category specific. It might be category specific. So we worked with a customer where they would not swatch their electronics, of course. They would swatch their fashion with an auto swatch like what I'm showing here. And then in the makeup category, they actually they routed those to a human, because you can't take an outside shot of the packaging of the makeup and say, well, here's my swatch. You have to actually learn about the color of that packaging, have a little dollop, use Photoshop to color it. And they were very efficient at that. But that's how swatching worked in the makeup category. So I think even though you want to automate a lot of this, you may have rule sets, may have logic, different ways of attacking this. And if you think about it in a deep way and lean into automation, you're going to find, again, are we going to save 2 minutes on this? I think so. I think across assets, we've found a lot of different ways that we're going to streamline and automate. Okay. That is our solution in a nutshell. I'm going to talk about distribution, but I'm going to skip ahead into the marketing context, because at the end of this, after you've created the various form factors that I need for all the channels, we get into distribution, which is kind of the next major context. So I don't have a separate slide in this section. We're going to move into broader MarTech. Now, this is a little bit of an eye chart, and it's going to be different for each one of you, but there's a lot of boxes and arrows. Hopefully you guys are people that like boxes and arrows. They don't have to be your boxes and arrows. I think different companies will have different pieces of this, some more than others, some more than what I'm showing. Sometimes you may not have, there's scenarios where maybe you don't do drop shipping, so that box goes away, but we do some cool stuff with personalization. And that's really talking to my process management. And I've got CMS kind of personalization that's flowing through. Your arrows are going to be different, just like your process is going to be different. I'm going to keep a clean version of this where the lines don't cross and we talk in high level. How does this flow work? Not just intake, processing, sausage making, out to channel. Where else does this get used? We spent a lot of time with the vendor portal and the PIM, and certainly something like an EDI feed would be a different way to get assets and content in. Sometimes the vendor portal would send content one way and data another way. Sometimes the content goes into the PIM and then flows to the DAM. Sometimes it goes from the portal to the DAM back up to the PIM. A lot of different ways to skin that cat, but it's very specific on your use cases. The product brokers, like EDI, is a way to get scale. This is very common in the grocery category, a little bit in fashion. In grocery, the three biggies are Syndigo, Salsify, and One World Sync. And so they found, if you're not in this category, quick explanation, thousands of consumer packaged goods companies that say, Coke and Pepsi and Mars and Kellogg's and everybody else that has product information and assets, they send that to Syndigo and Salsify and One World Sync. They package it up, standardize it, and they send it to every grocery that subscribes to that service. Where we end up with situations here is maybe I subscribe to Syndigo and I get 60% of my content. If I add Salsify, maybe I get 80% of my content. I'm still going to have a long tail, but I'm also going to have a Venn diagram where Syndigo sends me stuff and Salsify sends me stuff, and sometimes it's not the same stuff. And so I've seen customers deal with FIFO, kind of like it comes in first and it comes in next, and whatever I get last is the content I'm going to use. I'm just going to overwrite each other. I've also seen situations where I say, I really trust the Syndigo assets for this category, but Salsify for that category, so there's logic there. In any case, they create a lot of efficiencies, and the data is going to be probably cleaner than what you're going to get from the vendor portal, and certainly what you're going to get from email. But you also, at greater scale, product data issues, content issues start to get a little bit more complex. And sometimes you'll get more content than you would when you force your vendors to send you the information. Moving down on the left, dropship vendors. Similar category. Again, if you're not familiar with that concept, 50,000 foot view is traditionally, I'm a department store, I buy content, I put it in my warehouse, I try to sell it in my e-commerce system, I ship it when I was selling. Dropship just skips ahead to the selling. I'm going to put it on my e-commerce system. If I sell a few of those products, I send it back to the original vendor. I've got a relationship with them. They fulfill it from their warehouse and ship it, and then we share the revenue. So that's the dropship relationship. And what that means is if I'm a e-commerce and e-tailer, a department store that has leaned into dropship as a strategy, I sign a new relationship and I have an entire catalog of shoe company that I need to get online right away. And as soon as I put it online, I can make more money on it. Dropship vendors, just like Syndigo and Salsify, have figured out this niche between companies that are interested in dropship, go to market, companies that would like to service that with their e-commerce class. So dropship vendors would include companies like Miracle, Rhythm, R-I-T-H-U-M, which is merged with a company called Disco. Those are dropship vendors that kind of sit as that middleman role as well, and create a lot of efficiency, but also a lot of volume as you might imagine, entire catalogs coming through, kind of having to be processed at scale very quickly. I know this is an eye chart. Bear with me. I'm not going to drain each of the right side. I think they're a little bit simpler. One thing I will say in this context is I have not talked about marketing process management. So this would be like a Workfront or an Asana or those kinds of products. I don't have content coming in from vendors and then hitting a project management system. And the reason for that, it's intentional. I don't think they're the right tool to handle thousands of assets every day. What I do think is that they want to consume those assets. So if I've got thousands of assets coming through and building to a PDP in a semi-automated, structured way with as few human steps as possible, I think probably more important is the email campaign I'm going to build around it, or the marketing circular print piece that I'm going to send out and drive couponers to my stores. And so I think that is a place where marketing process management, having access to the product content that is coming through from my vendors and even the lifestyle content, really important. So that's the place where I would think these people really need to be seeing that content from the digital asset management, being able to find the content and be able to market with it, super important. Moving down to the right, dynamic creative optimization tool sets, also going to need that product content that's coming through. Personalization engines, also going to need that content. And I think here we unlock a real power of the dam. It's a little beyond the context of this particular problem, but if you have a dam with a queryable set of content to provide the next best offer, or content that is specific to the kind of stuff that Colton likes to buy versus the kind of stuff that Beau likes to buy, that's really important, but I kind of need the content to be in some sort of centralized repository that I can pull it out by data. So capturing that data doesn't just service getting onto e-commerce systems. It also unlocks the potential that we're all trying to get to aspirationally with personalization and dynamic optimization, A/B testing, funnel optimization. So that's another benefit that good metadata intake at scale and putting that in one place rather than just on a server somewhere or dumping on the e-commerce where it only serves PDPs, that's not an optimal situation, and it kind of blocks a lot of the more advanced things we'd like to do as retailers. Moving up on this slide, asset delivery. I think in the retail space, many of us who've been in this world for a while know that we're, Scene 7 or Dynamic Media, as Adobe would like us to rebrand it. And you might be using that product, you might be using a CDN, you might be using, there's point source solutions in this case. The point here is that rather than having the dam take traffic, you want some sort of delivery tier that is optimizing that delivery for the particular channels, having one source of truth that flows through with a square form factor for my e-commerce, different from my marketing automation and my email messaging, certainly my social is going to have different form factors. So that asset delivery tier that can take more traffic on the various channels is really important in this context as well. And I don't think we need to drain the right side slides. That's a lot of technical, pseudo-technical content really quickly. Colton, anything that you're seeing kind of from customers in this space?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time looking at kind of very similar diagrams to this, and everybody's got a different version. And what I see very commonly is brands trying to force their sometimes decades-old legacy ERP to do some of these functions. Right? It's done it for the past 10 years or 20 years. It can or should continue to do it. And the big thing that I always try to advise, and again, I've got no horse in the race of ERP transformations, not something that Northern does very intentionally. But what we try to do is future-proof you as much as possible, right? Look at like what is the ideal tech stack, and when you're potentially or theoretically looking at an ERP transformation, if you can start to remove some of these areas of responsibility from your ERP and offload asset management into a profit dam, your product information into a PIM, looking at like marketplace distribution, like these are very complex and dynamic things that we're trying to accomplish in this ever-evolving digital ecosystem. And when you start to kind of like compartmentalize these areas of responsibility into these very specialized pieces of software, it can reduce your risk and reduce the scope of an eventual ERP transformation, right? So a little bit adjacent maybe to today's conversation, but I think that when we're starting to invest and be more forward-looking around what technologies make sense, sometimes that's needed to have that conversation internally around change management. ERP should never have probably done this, but moving forward will not do it. And it's for the sake of kind of cleaning up your tech stack, potentially on a multi-year transformation, 3 or 5 years out, starting to think that way.
Resonates a great deal as a reformed ERP consultant. I think
I'm so sorry you had to go through that.
That's okay. That's okay. I got out. It's one of the few. I feel like they say SAP consultants never got out. I guess I'm the counterexample. In any case, I do think that's absolutely right. And this shows a PIM, but I've definitely built integrations where the master data is sitting in an ERP and we're pulling information out from AS400s, and I would not recommend. So I think that's a great context. And of course, these idealized lines and boxes get a lot messier in real world. One thing I will say that I've seen that I really lean into, these are all kind of specific lines. I'm really excited by some of our customers at larger scale that are, this is not revolutionary, and of course everything old is new again, but some of the middleware concepts now for queuing technologies, like putting Kafka, so instead of 4 lines coming into the digital asset management system, there's kind of one front door. And you kind of, just like the product brokers have solved the problem for all that externalized stuff, they've now, all that content comes in the same way, and the digital asset management subscribes, pulls it in when it's ready. Likewise, all the channels on the right side that are subscribing and need that content, instead of pushing to it whether they're ready, maybe allowing them to pull when they've got a subscription to stuff that's new and ready. And I've got the latest and greatest in the makeup category, and hey, I'm doing a makeup email campaign. So I think some of the lines on this may get intimidating, but I think there are ways to simplify this diagram, even when you get outside the kind of complexity of the real world, beyond idealized marketing line boxes. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the solution. Now, how do we get from problem to solution? A lot of hard work, but I will give you at least the 3-step process for me. And I hope I'm not coming off as cheating here to say that it's people, process, technology, because I'm going to be more specific. I'm actually going to start with process. This is always, always, always what we're going to start with when we're in a content supply chain problem. And I'm not expecting anyone to read these particular bullets. I hope you're not. I think it's probably client deliverable. But the point here is that we want to capture the information. We want to think through the process all the way to the end, and think about where we're going to capture the information, where it's going to be most efficient to capture the information. If you do this end-to-end process map, you will realize that later on, I need to know whether this is a product update so I can shunt it off to the product update human queue. Well, that means that up front in the intake, I need to know whether this is a product update, or I need to check to see if I already have an asset for this product, and therefore I move it into the update queue. So that process mapping and thinking through the flow chart at a really detailed level as well as the information to capture at the right point, is the first step in this process. The second thing you want to do is to think about the people. And now that I've said, hey, I need to capture these 7 data points for 5 or 6 assets that come in, here's a example of a wireframe. Does this look realistic? Before I build this, do I think that anyone's going to take the time? Is this going to be better than their current experience? Is this going to excite them to be able to put this information in? Do I need to do something complicated with a CSV where they can upload it? Do I need to have a better user experience that's maybe fully web-based, not a bunch of drop-downs? Being relentless about finding clicks and removing them, transitions and removing them, automating where I can, thinking about the user experience. And this isn't going to be where you want your visual designers to go crazy. This is where you want your user experience people to think really long and hard about how do we shave time from the user experience. So that's the next point. That's people as you think about where the people interact with the process. And last but not least, I said this briefly along the way, I think this is a technology problem. I don't think it starts with a technology problem, but once you've identified the process and people, I do not think you are going to find a product and go RFP it and find some DAM vendor or some PIM vendor or some PLM vendor that sets this up right for you. I think that you are going to have to find something that does the asset storage, the data storage that you need, and then build the custom workflows, the custom user interfaces, the custom buttons, the custom pieces that are specific to your data, to your content, to the people that need to do your checks. And I do think this is a custom build, but if you have sufficient scale, there's absolutely a strong ROI to make this investment, to streamline the labor costs, and to grow your top line because you've got better content on your e-commerce at the very least, and probably across all your channels. So that's the end of our story today. I think we certainly have time for questions, but Colton, did we get anybody in? Was everyone shy today?
Yeah, we did get a couple questions. And I think just one thing on what you're just talking about in terms of kind of like quantifying the impact on this. We do have some results in the poll. So thank you to everyone that submitted that. If anybody hasn't submitted yet, please do, because I'm very interested in the insights. But we've got folks saying that they're receiving 1,000 to 10,000 assets per day. And we've got people that are saying in some cases it's taking 5 to 10 minutes, in some rare cases more than 10 minutes per asset, right? So I think, Beau, you've got a pretty handy calculator I've seen around kind of like determining the ROI and the impact of doing something like this. So I think it's relatively straightforward to calculate the savings and build a business case for the CFO who is always curious about that ROI.
Absolutely. Glad to help with that if anyone needs any help with some simple math.
And we do have 2 questions too. Your call, Beau, if you want to dive into those, or if they're nuanced, we can get back to them. But there's a couple in there.
Oh, we've streamlined a lot of chaos. Let's bring on the chaos. We can cut this part of the webinar if I really flub them, but let's bring them on.
Perfect. Sounds good. Okay. Question number 1. We've got, is the vendor asset intake part of Northern, or is this a third-party program like AEM?
Great question. And sorry, this wasn't clear. We are not software providers. So the vendor asset intake process is one that we have helped many customers streamline for their situation, which is, all cards on the table, why we've talked about the technology, right? So we will generally build an optimized process on top of other pieces of technology. And so you've asked about AEM. That's certainly AEM Assets is a product that we've worked with for many years. Some of the screenshots in this system were AEM. Some of the customizations that we built on it were AEM. So thinking about that process and that customization on top of the software package, I don't think AEM solves this problem on its own. I'm very confident that it doesn't, because if it did, I don't know exactly why we've spent lots and lots of time optimizing it for our clients, but we will help with that on top of a technology stack. We do not sell an off-the-shelf technology stack that solves this problem. If I thought that was possible, probably wouldn't be working in the services business. Hopefully that answers the question, at least at first pass.
Yes, and for the person that asked, if we didn't answer it in the way that you were hoping, feel free to follow up with us and we'll have a detailed conversation. Second question, for images coming from 2 product brokers, is there a solution to ask either a vendor or a coworker to verify which is the correct image? So I'm curious, so like kind of like approaching like Workfront possibly, or maybe there's an automation directly. And Dan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I probably, again, I would stay away from like workfront automation there. I think there's a couple different ways. If you can't build an algorithm to tell a computer that I always prefer Syndigo over Salsify, or vice versa, or always in this category prefer Syndigo and a Salsify. If you need to have the assets compared by a human, that's an example where I would build the technology. I might have a side by side and just a queue of all the assets that came in from both those systems, side by side, left, right. And by the way, I would probably build some technology in there to say only when those assets are not identical. When they're identical, which might be 90% of the time, since Coke sent it to Salsify and Coke sent it to Syndigo, and I got the same Coke can or 12 pack or whatever, at that point, I'd probably just let those through. But the exceptions to the exceptions, when I've got overlap and the binary is not identical, then I might put them in a side by side. If I thought that was important, I couldn't build an algorithm. I would want a human in the loop, but I would want to give them a really easy way to say right, left to pick the right asset for us.
Perfect. It's helpful. Awesome. That is all for questions. Appreciate the time and the expertise and the wisdom, Beau. You're brilliant at this. So if any other questions from the group, please send it to us. Beau, any parting words?
Oh no, you just said I was brilliant. I'm like speechless. I think I'm done.
Perfect. Let's wrap there. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.